Hey friends, I'm Jessica, and I want to know, have you ever experienced something that you'd rather not have happened? Things like being grounded all week, or forgetting your line in the school play, or canceling your birthday party. Those are all the worst. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want any of those things to happen. Now, if I had to guess, I think that another thing you may not want to happen is talking about sex and relationships at church. But you know what? I know that you can handle it. And this week, we're going to have some real talk about something I think is super important to remember. But before we get into our talk today, I want to ask a question. How many of you have expectations about dating? I want you to think about it for a second. Now, I'm not talking about the expectations you have for yourself. I'm talking about the kind that other people have for you. Maybe your parent or your guardian doesn't think you should even be thinking about dating yet. Or maybe your older sibling is telling you to ignore the person who likes you. Maybe your best friend is already planning your wedding one day with your current crush. I know for me, when I was in middle school, all my friends around me were dating. They all had boyfriends and girlfriends and crushes, and I just really wasn't that interested yet because I was focused on soccer and other things I like to do. I asked a few of my friends to tell us some of the expectations they had growing up about dating. Here's what they said.
What's up, Jess? For me, when it came to dating, curfew was a really big deal. I had to be home by 10 p.m., and if I wasn't, well, my dad made it clear that it mattered.
It was my parents actually coming on the first date that I ever had. We actually ended up having a really good time.
If I wanted to date, I needed to have a job. Because my parents would say, if you want to date, you need dating money.
I wasn't allowed to date when I was in middle school.
Can you relate to any of that? Maybe you had all these expectations given to you about dating and relationships, but they aren't exactly what you want for yourself. Or maybe you've never even thought about what you wanted when it comes to dating and relationships. That's okay too. What you need to know is these thoughts are normal. And this series is all about getting to the truth of things like sex and relationships. And one thing that I want us to have real talk about together is the choice we have when it comes to being in a relationship or not. Now, before we go on, can I ask you to do something for me? Think about the plot of every movie or TV show you love that has a couple in it. What's your dating and relationships look like there? Maybe they sound like this. Two people start dating and they fall in love and then they get married or live happily ever after, right? Maybe that's even been the way most of the relationships you've seen in real life tend to go. Your parents or grandparents have been married for a long time. Your older siblings are all dating and want to be in relationships. Your group leader is engaged. Maybe your friends all seem to be really interested in dating too. It seems like being in a relationship is something that a lot of people want for their lives, either right now or when they're finally allowed to date. And honestly, that sort of makes it seem like that's the way things are supposed to go for all of us. Like dating and being in a relationship is what you're supposed to plan for. Almost as if there's one path to take, and this is it. Now, of course, if you're somebody who is really curious about or interested in dating, this doesn't sound all that bad. But what if you're not? What if you don't really want to be dating? Or you're not sure what you want when it comes to relationships? Or you know that right now, and maybe even always, dating and relationships aren't something you want. Is it really an option to choose something else for your life? A lot of times it feels like the answer is no, doesn't it? Whether it's because of the rules or expectations put on us or just what we've seen around us, it's easy to think that when it comes to something like dating and relationships, there's really just one option. And if we don't choose that option, if we don't want to be in a relationship either now or as we get older, well, it can feel like somehow we're going to miss out. We may start to wonder, is it okay if I never date or get married? If I choose not to be in a relationship, will people think that something's wrong with me? Or what if nobody wants to be in a relationship with me? Is the entire point of life just to get married and have kids? Will God be disappointed if I don't do those things? Can God still use me for cool, amazing, incredible things if my life doesn't include dating and relationships? If you found yourself asking questions like these, then I'm so glad that you're here. Because not only is this a place where we can have real talk about stuff like this, it's also a place where we discover what's true about it. When it comes to pressures and expectations and choices we have about things like dating and relationships, here's what's true. If your path in dating and relationships doesn't look the way everyone seems to think it should, that's okay. In fact, I can guarantee you that if dating and relationships are never a major part of your life, you definitely do not have to wonder if you're missing out on big, amazing things. And how do I know that? Well, because of what Jesus said about this whole thing. And knowing Jesus changes everything, including the way we see relationships. If there's anybody who is not afraid to have real talk about anything, it's Jesus. When he was alive on earth, he made a point to tell people the truth about life and what God's best for us really looks like. And the good news for us is that the people who knew and followed Jesus then wrote down what they heard and saw so that we can read about it today. We're going to look at some things that a couple of Jesus' closest friends and followers recorded from his time on earth. And they're things that can help us shift our thinking when it comes to not only our relationship status, but the whole point of life. Before we get into it, let me set the scene for you. Jesus spent a lot of his time on earth teaching and preaching. He shared stories and lessons and messages to help people understand things about God and about life. One of Jesus' most famous sermons is known as the Sermon on the Mount. Now, this is just a fancy way of saying that Jesus delivered this particular message on, you guessed it, a mountain. And while the entire message is pretty cool, there's one part in particular that I think can help us understand what our focus in life should be. So let's take a look. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. Now, I love the way that Jesus put this. When we're following him, the one and only goal for our life is simple: to reflect who God is to the world all around us. To be a light that shines God's love. To live so boldly and brightly that nothing can hide it. Kind of like this. Whoa, that one's bright. Because when we make that our focus, people can't help but notice. It's like a light in the darkness. When we use our gifts and our passions and our whole lives to reflect God to the world around us, people will see it. They'll notice. And maybe it will lead them to turn their light on too and start following Jesus. See, that's the point. As followers of Jesus, our one and only goal is to live our lives so that light shines out of us. When we make that our focus, we know we're not missing any part of the point of life. Now, maybe you're thinking, that sounds cool and all, but what does this have to do with whether or not I choose to date? And I think that's a great question. See, there are so many different ideas about what the point of life is. A lot of them have to do with things like dating and relationships and eventually getting married. And sometimes even other Christians may lead us to believe that if we're not interested in dating or getting married, that somehow we'll be missing out on God's plan for our lives. But that kind of thinking is not true. In fact, it completely misses the point. Jesus calls us to live a life that shines and reflects God. And as people made in the image of God, we can do that all on our own. We don't need a significant other or a relationship to show God to the world around us because we already have God's image in us. Can marriage reflect the image of God? Absolutely. Can a single person reflect the image of God? Absolutely. Are you missing anything if you choose to be single? No, not at all. Real talk. You can choose to be single. There have been incredible leaders in history that have made a huge impact on the world who were single. Jesus, the Son of God, who came to save all of humanity and who performed miracles and changed people's lives, was single. John the Baptist, who was a prophet that came to tell the world that Jesus was coming to earth, was single. Mother Teresa, who devoted her whole life to serving the poor and won a Nobel Peace Prize for her work, was single. Paul, one of the most famous leaders in church history who wrote a lot of the Bible, was single. God can use single people to do incredible things. And while relationships are a part of life, they're not the point of life. Sure, they can add great things to our lives, but we don't need them to live the full, meaningful, awesome life that Jesus offers us. See, if we're choosing to live a life based on what Jesus says it's all about, then we're choosing the best possible life for ourselves. We're getting the point. You can have people ask you on dates and people ask you to be their boyfriend or their girlfriend, and you can still choose to be single. Just because somebody likes you doesn't mean you need to be in a relationship with them. It's about what you want, not what they want from you. Dating, choosing to be single right now, choosing to be single for a while, or maybe even choosing to be single always. No matter what you choose when it comes to dating or being single, when you choose a life that follows Jesus, you can know that you won't miss anything that God has for you. That's why today I want you to feel confident that you can choose to be single. And when you realize this, you recognize that dating and relationships are a part of life, but they aren't the point of life. The point of life is to reflect God's love to the whole world. And because of that, you have a choice. And that choosing can start right now. You can choose to date when you're allowed to, or you can choose to be single. And no matter what anyone else's expectation of you is, you can choose what's best for you without wondering if you're missing out. Real talk. You can choose to be single. And we can experience the full, amazing, incredible life that Jesus came to give us, no matter what. We can reflect God to the whole world around us, whether we choose to date or choose to be single. And I don't know about you, but that kind of life sounds like something worth running toward. So as you run toward a life that reflects the love of God to the world, here are 3 things I want you to remember. First, you can choose to be single. When we know the kind of life Jesus calls us to live, we can choose what's best for us, no matter what everyone else is doing. So if you don't want to date right now, that's great. And if you don't want to be in a relationship ever, that's great too. You're made in the image of God on your own. You don't need a relationship to complete you. So if you choose to be single, choose it with confidence, because you know you're not missing out on the point of life. You're choosing God's best for you as you go after the real point of life. Next, remember, you can have a better outlook if you choose to date. Maybe you aren't dating now, but you might want to one day. And when you do, remembering that relationships are just a part of life, not the point of life, it will help you have a better outlook on dating. Instead of seeing that other person as your whole life, you'll know that they're just a part of it. Instead of looking for someone to complete you, you'll know you're already complete. And if you eventually choose something else, like to break up or be single, you'll know that you're not missing out on anything just because you aren't in a relationship. Lastly, remember you can celebrate what other people choose. Because here's the truth, my life may look different than your life. What Jesus leads me to won't be the same exact thing that he leads you to. And honestly, that's amazing, because each one of us is made uniquely. For some of us, that might include things like relationships. And for others, it might mean choosing to be single. Neither one is better than the other. And while others may make us believe that we should want to be in a relationship, we know that's just not the case. And because of that, we can celebrate what other people choose for themselves. We can be better friends and supporters of their choices when it comes to dating and being single when we see them choosing what's best for their lives. Real talk, you can choose to be single. And one of the best places to keep talking about this is with your group. They'll encourage you to go after the real point of life and shine your light into the world. And they'll also be there to support and celebrate when you choose God's best for your life, whether that's dating or being single. Either way, you can still reflect God's image to the world around you in a big way.